Hello, and happy last day of October. So this week I really just wanted to address a few things regarding aviation and flight school as a whole. Many and in fact oftentimes I get asked, how do I survive flight training? What is the hardest part about becoming a pilot? And how do you just survive? Which is totally understandable because I have had plenty of instances where I've definitely questioned my own survival and flight training. So, first things first, what is the hardest part about being a pilot? For me, it was probably starting off with no knowledge and going from zero to somebody. Um, I had, I did have some knowledge, like I already came in previously with the phonetic alphabet memorized. I had also come into flight training with a good knowledge of what type of plane was what. Like, for example, what's a Boeing 737? I knew, oh, well, I want to fly the Boeing 777. I did know what kind of aircraft I would be flying for flight training, the Cirrus SR-20G Golf 6. I had also previously come in with 2 intro flights behind my back, so I definitely knew what an aileron was. I knew what flaps did. I knew what a rudder was. I knew the basic components of every aircraft. I knew what a fuselage was. Another thing that I did know was I had some general idea of air traffic control procedures because I loved to plane spot. I still remember prior to any amount of training that I received, I loved to go down to Salt Lake International and my local airport, South Valley Regional, and just watch planes. And I would tune in on my live ATC and hear what the controllers were saying to the pilots. So I had some general idea of that. I had a basic idea and a very, very generalized idea. So I am a first generation pilot, and for those who don't know or may not know what that means, I came in with no experience, well, relatively no experience. I am the first pilot in my family. Both sides. My parents are not pilots. My siblings are not pilots. I am a first generation pilot, the guinea pig, whatever you want to call it, but here we are. So, what are some things that you can do to get prepared to enter the trap of flight school? It's not a trap, I assure you. The first few weeks it will be overwhelming. So you really want to prepare yourself in the best way possible. And so I'm going to give you a few tips in this podcast on how to prepare. I know I have a lot of friends that are starting their private pilot's license training or instrument, maybe even commercial training in the spring. So I really want to offer some tips for all steps of the way, for those who are starting fresh, for those who may be starting out with an like going into instrument, vice versa. So these really do apply for everything. So we're going to start with beginners. If you are a beginner, this is your first step to becoming a successful pilot, and it is research as much as you can before you get flying. Like for me, what really, really did help was knowing the phonetic alphabet. A is Alpha, Z is Zulu, D is Delta. It doesn't stand for, anything else. That's just aviation. That's life. So have all of that memorized. because that will definitely help you out. I still remember the first 3 weeks of ground class, people were still trying to memorize it, and I had already had it memorized for a little under a year now, by the time that point had hit. So know your phonetics, and be able to have someone quiz you and say, what does A stand for? And you say alpha. Or make flashcards Q Quebec, just be able to recite that and recite it fast. My favorite thing, and the way that I practiced it, was definitely by driving down the road and naming off street signs and reciting them in my head. For example, you have McDonald's. I would spell out McDonald's, Mike, Charlie, Delta, and go all the way down until I had reached the end. And the goal was, as soon as I saw the sign, I would have it and start reciting it in my head. And the goal was I would be done as soon as I passed that sign. So that's just something that really helped me. Another thing that helped me was I do struggle with spelling, which is interesting to most people considering that I write. And I've been writing for quite some time. But I am quite possibly a horrible speller. And so in order to kind of combat that and learn phonetics, I would spell out words in phonetics just to help me understand kind of both sides to the story. So another thing you can do is research the FAR aim. Prior to coming to flight training, I had no idea what the FARs were, or the aim. So be able to know the basic FARs, 91-205, Part 43, Part 830 NTSB reporting, know 91-213, as well as each little section that talks about what license or rating you're going to get. So just look into those. And the AIM is very, very helpful because it breaks down kind of different subsections. So like I mentioned earlier about air traffic control procedures, there are a lot that goes into those. It is very confusing. When you reach your first Bravo for the first time, you'll probably be thinking, what on earth is this? So reading the AIM can really help you materialize and comprehend what you are getting yourself into. My favorite section of the AIM is definitely the NAVAID section, because when you get to instrument flight training, learning the different NAVAIDs can get pretty confusing, and that's where you kind of can reference what their frequency bands are. So it talks about VOR, it talks about ILS, all that fancy stuff. But if you really want to dig deeper, the AIM is where you really want to go. So another tip for beginners is the PHAC. Some people call it the PHAC, some people call it the FAC, but it is the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. That is really next to the FAR AIM. That's basically like our Bible. The FAR AIM is the Old Testament, and the PHAC is the New Testament, if you get what I mean. So that is basically going to be your chapters divided into sections. They talk about anything and everything you can daydream of relating to VFR, Visual Flight Rules Practices. And for you IFR people out there, I recommend the Instrument Flying Handbook and the Instrument Procedures Handbook. Those two books combined will really, really help you out on that check ride for the ground portion. Also, for anyone who is starting out or going into any type of training, air traffic control procedures. This is a question I get asked a lot, especially as someone who's going after their commercial license, I get asked, how did you understand ATC communications? So one thing about that is it's confusing. As a native English speaker, someone from the United States, it is hard to understand. So anybody who is struggling, I get it. I've had my fair share of days when I didn't even understand what they were saying. It just came through too inaudible, too confusing. But first things first, don't be afraid to ask. With air traffic controllers, they want you to be safe, and they are there to help you, not to give you a deviation. That is the last thing they want to do. Trust me. That is the last thing they want to do. I have met a couple controllers, and they all say that is the last thing they want to do, is ruin your day, ruin your record with a deviation. So don't be afraid to ask. If something comes unclear, ask them to confirm it, to give you vectors. Get flight following. If you are instrument rated, use that instrument rating and fly on an IFR flight plan, because it helps, and they're there to help. But the biggest thing is combating the language curve. For me, it was understanding what they were saying. Because to begin with, you're thrown in this environment to an airport you've never been to before, to an airspace you've never been to before. You're being thrown into just the ravenous wolves, if you will. So, what I highly recommend is, there was something I learned in Spanish class. Back when I was pretty proficient in Spanish, I've kind of lost a little bit, but I can speak here and there in Spanish. But I took a few Spanish classes in high school, and what they suggested was listen, because if you throw yourself into the environment, that is better than just avoiding it completely and easing into it. So what they suggested was to immerse yourself in the language. And to be honest, I quite frankly thought, how am I going to immerse myself in a language that I'm not even in Mexico? I do live in a state where there are quite a lot of Spanish speakers, which is amazing, and I'm grateful for that. But, it's not something that I can just hear every day. I can't just stand at a certain place and just listen, right? So they actually suggested going on YouTube and searching up videos completely in Spanish, switching your movies to be completely in Spanish. They recommended, scrapping English, like do a full day of just Spanish. And I did it, and I would do like about an hour a day of just full Spanish. And I actually came to the conclusion that my Spanish got a whole lot better. So I give the same suggestion for air traffic control. It is hard to understand. So there's an awesome website called liveatc.net. I think it's .net, but liveatc. They broadcast certain airports, and you can click on them and listen to them. So for example, they do have uncontrolled fields listed on there. Those are good to listen to for those who are coming from a towered airport for training to an untowered airport. So basically that would help with people coming, maybe if they've done their training in Provo or they've done their training at Vegas, right? And so that will help them kind of transition and see how to enter the pattern with an untowered field like Cedar City or Nephi or Delta, Kanab, wherever. And so just kind of match up the procedures on Flight Radar 24 with what they're saying on live ATC. So for example, I love Salt Lake International. I'm from Salt Lake. Definitely a good place. But I was struggling for the first 2 flights of my commercial training. I was struggling to get down ATC procedures and ATC communications because there's no set in stone like manuscript of what you're supposed to, do, because sometimes they'll go, oh, hey, Cirrus, November 3-8 Kilo Bravo, squawk, and then they may hand you off. Whereas sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes they may say November 3-8 Kilo Bravo, stand by. There's no set script for what's going to guarantee happen every time. And so live ATC kind of provides a way to see the different turn of events as they're happening. So my favorite thing to do was to tune into Salt Lake City just on my phone and listen to it and monitor the frequency while watching flight radar. Then that way I was able to understand what descend via means, or stand by, or what a Bravo clearance sounds like. I was also able to understand kind of their manuscript, as well as the commercial pilot side of things. And my all-time favorite was when I would be flying, and I'm just sitting there in my little Cirrus, flying along on my flight plan and on flight following, and then ATC would get on and tell like a Hawaiian Airlines flight to descend from flight level 330. There, you feel like you're flying with jets, because you are. Again, you're way far down there, but at the same time, it gives you a sense of joy because you're one step closer to that dream, to that end goal. So that's what I suggest for ATC communications and ATC procedures. There's a lot in the AIM. There's a lot to it. Make sure you know the difference between Delta airspace, Charlie airspace, and Bravo, because those clearances can all sound a little bit different. So another tip for pilots who are starting out is chair fly, because those first initial maneuvers are quite tricky to learn. And so definitely chair fly. Something weird that I actually used to do and still do to this day as an instrument rated private pilot is when I'm driving on the road in my car, I will literally pretend to be flying. Watching out for traffic. Traffic, 3 o'clock, we got them in sight. And that's another thing you can do with ATC procedures, is literally just drive around in your car and pretend like you're being vectored, or pretend like there's traffic. What would you do in this moment? What would I do if I had an engine failure right now and I was at 10,000 feet in my car? It's just silly things. And I think that's what a lot of pilots are embarrassed about, is because we have stupid ways of doing things and stupid ways of remembering things, but in the end it helps. And that is something that is really detrimental to success. So let's kind of move up and talk about a little bit more towards instrument. I published a podcast, I believe last week, about instrument rating and why you need to get instrument rated. So go and watch that right now, pause this and go and listen to that, because if you're flying for fun, you need to get instrument rated. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but for real, the training is an absolute necessity. The training is amazing. And you'll understand yourself, your body, as well as the aircraft. And the weather. how unforgiving this world is. So with that being said, for instrument training, again, read that procedures handbook and that flying handbook. It is one of the greatest tools that you have, and I wish I would have read more of it before taking my check ride. I wish I would have read the smaller details of like what things meant. So first things first, with both VFR and IFR, like, know your charting symbology before you even probably come to training. You know, have an idea of what the sectional chart, the low and route chart, looks like, because that will help you get a better understanding of your procedures. And for IFR, you do get into approach plates, and that also goes for SIDS and STARS. So if you kind of help prepare yourself prior and know what exactly each of those means and the symbology that goes behind it, then you'll have a better idea. With instrument training, it is very important to be confident with yourself. This is what kind of helped me bust my check ride in a way, but make sure that you're confident. Be confident. You are a private pilot. You are at least a private pilot. You know how to fly an airplane. You've been doing this for at least 40, 50 plus hours. And that's really my biggest tips with instrument. Really dive deep into RNAV, LPV, all that jazz. But it's really, being a pilot is about getting ahead of the game and trying to figure out what things mean. And something I have to offer as a piece of advice for relatively anyone going to be a pilot is research before you even step foot into a program. Know the difference between a 141 program and a 61 program. Which would be better for you? You know, if you're just going up through private and maybe getting an instrument rating, definitely part 61. 141 is a little bit more rigorous, is a little bit more studious, but it all depends on learning and your method of how quickly you want to get somewhere. For example, I chose 141 because of the rigorous. I love set in stone schedules. I love fast pace. I could have done 61 fast pace. I do admit that. But I wanted the opportunity to have a restricted ATP. I wanted the minimum of 1,000 hours instead of 1,500. There's a lot of pros and cons to both. I can name off a few cons for 141, but I think we'll get into that in another podcast. But just know what you're getting yourself into, because if you can build that foundation and build that picture, then you're going to be able to be a little bit more successful. And another piece of advice is research the aircraft you're going to be flying. You don't necessarily have to know how to do the weight and balance and performance limitations, all that. Just kind of know, like, what kind of engine does your plane have? Is it air-cooled? Is it liquid-cooled? Is it naturally aspirated? Does it have a turbo? Is what kind of propeller? Is it constant speed? Ground adjustable, fixed pitch? Is your, what kind of de-icing, anti-icing systems? What's your service ceiling? You know, the Cirrus, for us, it's 17.5. So, 17,500. What is the maximum demonstrated crosswind? What's the maximum takeoff weight? You know, just knowing little things like that. Like, again, what's your V speeds? That still gets me to this day. V speeds. Those are so hard, and I'm still trying to figure out a way how to remember them all, because it gets ridiculous. So being able to kind of piece together information prior to even starting about your aircraft, you're going to not only amaze your instructor, but you're going to have a lot of an easier time. That is something that I wish that I would have known prior to coming to a flight school, prior to even stepping foot in an aircraft in general. So those are just a few tips that I have for everyone. Just get yourself established, get yourself set up, take your time on making a decision, because for some people, waiting is the best, and I get it. For some people, right out of high school is the best bet, and that was me. Like, my story, I finished high school early, and then I took some college classes through another college, and then I jumped here, where I am today at Southern Utah University. Yeah, so for me, it was right out of high school. That was the best option for me. Some people, it might mean waiting 5 years. Some people, it might mean exploring a little bit before finally making a decision, and that's great. But being a pilot is all about being safe, doing what's best for you, practicing good aeronautical decision making and crew resource management. Staying ahead of the aircraft and staying ahead of the time is going to be the most successful ways you can survive flight training. So another thing I wanted to add is the question of what happens if I've been out of school for a long time. So I don't have a perspective on this because, again, I went directly from high school into college. But the best piece of advice is to maybe take classes before you start flying. If you're in a Part 141, take some classes to just kind of ease yourself back in the groove of things, and then jump into flying. But I unfortunately I don't have a good solid perspective on that because I've never experienced it. But just kind of get yourself to ease back into it. If you've been out of school for a while, it may be hard to kind of come back, which I totally get. So just find ways that work best for you. Another question that kind of goes along with this, which I find interesting, is what are the best steps to take if you lose interest in flying? Again, I don't have the best definition of what to do. Because I love flying, and nothing can deter me from it. I am addicted. So the best bet is probably to maybe try a different instructor first. Maybe you're having a bad experience. Maybe it's not the best fit for you, which is totally understandable. Change instructors. And if that doesn't work, then maybe change flight schools. Take an intro flight somewhere else. Change flight schools. Or maybe if that doesn't work for you, seek appointed sources and consider all the options. Right? So it's basically just like what we're taught, right? So make the right decision in the right moment. Is it legal? Is it safe, right? So make the right decision for you. But I would personally start with switching flight instructors first. And then after that, try switching schools. And then after that, consider everything and maybe just keep searching. But maybe it's not for you, which flying is not for everyone. And that's totally understandable. But flying is so rewarding, and I really encourage everybody to be a pilot. But then again, it's not for everyone, and yeah, even if you just wanted to fly for fun, make that dream happen. Make that come true. Even if you just want to go after being instrument rated, so you can, something a little bit different. Maybe you just want to fly bush planes in Alaska. Maybe you just want to buy a plane and fly leisurely across the country to Oshkosh every year because Oshkosh is a dream of mine. But I will be making that happen soon, hopefully. I have some ideas, maybe, of what to do about that. But recent news, before I wrap up this podcast, recent news has it, I'm not here to spread rumors, so if this is false, I'm so sorry, but rumor has it the Reno air races that were shut down just recently due to some extensive crashes and deaths, unfortunately. Rumor has it that they are moving to the state of Utah at Wendover. I could not be more happier if this is true, because I am not too far from Wendover. So, lots of airshow content coming soon. I have promised for several months now that I will be making videos about air shows. I've just gotten busy recently. I have a little bit of a break in work for the next couple of weeks. And so I hope to get some sentimental moments out. A recent flight on the B-17, that was amazing. Sentimental journey. I will definitely be making a podcast about that, as well as a actual video. I also have B-25 footage from Made in the Shade that I took a flight in a little over a year ago. And I also have a T-6 Texan that I need to get videos up where I flew over Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. Loved every second of it. But yeah, I have a lot of things to do for you guys, and I definitely look forward to it. But I just had the urgency to make this podcast to answer some questions, because I know that flight schools are taking admissions within the next little bit, and spring semester's coming up, and it's just getting crazy. But anyways, thank you all for listening. I hope that this worked to some extent for advice, and be safe, fly safe, and most of all, have fun.